Hi and welcome to another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law, the podcast that brings you the real stories from the people who've made it into some of the biggest and most aspirational in-house legal positions globally. I'm your host, Scott Brown. I am founder of Heriot Brown In-House Legal Recruitment, the business that powers this show, and I'm also a former corporate lawyer. On each episode, I hope to bring you unfiltered conversations with someone in a leadership position in-house. And these will give you an insight into some of the unscripted and honest chats that I have on a daily and weekly basis with some of the people in key executive leadership roles about what it really takes to help them build successful and fulfilling careers and teams in-house. We're going to be talking about strategic partnerships with business leaders, how you can have legal having a seat at the table function in the executive committee, and the key people and the moments that shaped each of our guest career paths, which is the most important thing for me. So this is where we're going to go beyond the CV and we're going to look at what it really takes to get into those positions, some of the luck that these people have had along the way and how they've made that and engineered that luck, and really what makes these fantastic leaders tick. So if this sounds like something for you, let's get into it. On this week's show, I'm joined by Roel Staes, who until recently was General Counsel for International for one of the largest American aviation businesses at FedEx. So Roel has been at FedEx for 22 years, joining in their Benelux team, and has progressed, and his role has taken on a whole load of different functions over the years, which at its peak, he was managing a team of 200 lawyers and around 300 lawyers from government and public affairs. So a massive remit, huge international scope. So it was great to hear about what that progress looks like, what it's like to work in a business for 22 years and how you keep that fresh and interesting. In this episode, Roel underlines the importance of communicating and over-communicating things and how important that is for a legal team or an in-house lawyer to underline their importance to a business. So constant communication about the value that you're adding and the projects that you're involved in, and not losing sight of communicating that internally. We also discuss what it's like to work in an organisation the size of FedEx, and how important it was for them as a business to have win-win situations and not just look at the winning and losing. Roel also shares a key lesson for him on creating win-win relationships when it came to negotiating contracts, and how he applied it later in his career as a leader within that legal function. So super interesting stuff from Roel, and loads of practically applicable things to those that are aspiring to be in that general counsel position. So there's loads of interesting information, whether you're looking to get into that top level, C-suite level general counsel position, from hearing it from someone who's been there and done it over the years. So we'll jump right in. Hi Roel, welcome to Lessons I Learned in Law.
Hello Scott. Nice.
Thanks for joining us. It's good to meet again, and keen to sort of crack on and hear more about your experience and the lessons. So I've given as best as I can a bit of an overview of your experience and your the positions held, but it'd be great to just hear sort of bird's eye view of where you're at the moment and your experience.
Yeah, so I spent the last 22 years at a company called FedEx, and I started really as a junior lawyer in the legal department in Brussels. Wow. With responsibilities for the Benelux, and then it was quickly expanded to include the Middle East, Africa, India, and then I sort of grew through the ranks, and my last role there, which I stepped down from just last month, was General Counsel International. Mm-hmm. And so in that role, I was responsible for all legal, regulatory, government affairs, and also security outside of the United States. Mm-hmm. So huge territory with a team of about 200 people on the legal side, 300 on the security side.
Wow.
The last few years I was more focused on Europe. Mm-hmm. That was my role until recently. As I said, I just stepped down from that. I'm taking a little bit of time off, and then hopefully on to new adventures.
Yeah, nice. Well, excited to see what the next chapter holds. 22 years as well. That's a fair stint. How does it sort of feel with the getting that time to think and space right now after that period of time?
Yeah, it's actually very easy to get used to not having all those things on your mind. I think it will be more difficult to switch back. But no, it's very interesting. Also, I've always at FedEx, I always expanded my responsibilities. I was never able to give something to somebody else. So I started with the Benelux, then Europe, and then the whole world outside of the US. So everything I just carried everything with me. Yeah. So to be able to read the news and see something and think, oh, that's not my problem anymore, it feels really good.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, a bit of a weight lifted on that front. That sounds like I was telling you before we started recording about moving house. That sounds, just taking stuff with you sounds like what our approach has been to moving house and acquiring and adding to a lot of stuff that now needs thrown out. But yeah, excellent. And you took on, I remember you saying you took on sustainability as well, was a big focus recently.
So in June 2023, the CEO asked me to lead sustainability for Europe for FedEx. And so that was quite interesting because FedEx put out quite ambitious sustainability goals to be carbon neutral by 2040. So I was asked to put the plan together to get the company on track to meet that objective. And that's quite an achievement because FedEx is one of the biggest airlines in the world, actually the biggest cargo airline in the world. And aviation, as you know, is in sustainability is quite challenging.
Yeah. So just interested to know if you could share, like, what are the metrics that really go into that then, looking at sustainability for a high emitter, and how does it work?
Well, it's all about CO2, right, for an airline. So, the way we approached that was to sort of look at the different aspects of the business to get a full view of everything that the company does, and then divide it in pieces, assign people to each of those, and come up with objectives that get you on the path towards carbon neutrality by 2040, and then you basically have sort of a line that needs to go down every year, and then you measure people against that.
Right, nice. And did leading that in Europe and running with that in Europe, how did that how did it sit with the global and the sort of US? The US approach, is there quite a difference between approach to sustainability and regulation?
It's evolving, of course, but
Europe
has always been, and that's probably why I've been so focused on it as well, because the reason it was given to me was because I was always the one knocking on the door and saying, well, we need to do this, we need to do that. And then somebody's just said, well, why don't you do it? So Europe has always been leading, but I was very surprised, especially in the last year or two, how Asia and Asian customers have been so focused on sustainability, and some of the more surprising ones. So it's not a European specific topic anymore. Now, of course, things are changing. We need to see how things will develop over time. But Europe, I mean, European customers, European employees as well, European stakeholders in general, regulators, have always been very much focused on sustainability, even in difficult times. Even, I thought with COVID that sort of that would go away or become less of a priority for a lot of people, but it hasn't gone away.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks for that. We'll jump into lesson one, if you share that.
Yeah. Lesson one, Scott, that I wanted to bring to the table is the importance of communication. And I know it's been discussed on your show here. But I couldn't not mention it because it's so critical for lawyers, and especially when you get into a leadership position as a GC or a CLO, communication becomes so critically important. And, the truth is that the people you deal with, especially if you're dealing with CEOs or other exec com members, you're not always the most favorite person they talk to. The CEO wants to talk to their salesperson about the new customer.
The good
he
news.
just signed up. Wants to talk about to marketing about the new product they're going to launch. And when the CEO wants to talk to finance about the P&L. And when we come in, it's not always with good news. It's sometimes difficult topics. So, when you get a CEO's attention, you need to be very brief and precise. And so the ability to be able to explain something which is sometimes complex and difficult in a very limited period of time, or if you write it down in just a few lines, is really something that is critically important to be successful. And so you need to develop a skill of being able to summarize things. And when you summarize, obviously you need to be complete. You can't leave things out that are important. You need to be factual and accurate. But at the same time, you can't have what I call pregnant sentences.
Right.
If you write to the ex-com or your CEO that the company may be fined, then they will probably want to know how much.
Right.
And it doesn't need to be 100,000, 250, but it should be between this and that in this range. So you need to be, accurate, complete, and no pregnant sentences. And I'm convinced that everything can be simplified. So you need to be able to simplify it and explain it in the words of the audience you're addressing.
Right.
So talk in business terms, don't talk in legal terms. So really put yourself in the shoes of the audience you're addressing and try to explain it in the way that they want to hear it. And as I said, everything can be simplified. And if you can't explain it, and I think Einstein said this, you probably don't understand it yourself. So I've had times where I spent hours and hours with my team trying to get to grips with a situation or understand something, and then turn around and explain it in under a minute to somebody in a meeting or whatever. And really, that capability, being able to do that is critically important to be successful, because that's what people appreciate as well. They don't want you to come in and be all over the place. They want you to be very precise and very clear in what you're trying to convey.
Yeah. You want the lawyer to be in control of the issues and knows that there's underlying things that are taken care of just by the way that they present on something, right?
When I write something, or when I'm going into a meeting and need to explain something, I always start with what are the messages? What are the three things I need to relay, and then start from that, and then fill in sort of the blanks around that.
Yeah, it's really good advice. When did you first learn that and start applying it?
Well, at FedEx we had something, and it's still there, but which was very useful, it's called the weekly activity report. Right. And every lawyer needs to write down, and it's by a set time during the week, what the 3-4 things, most important things they've worked on. And it can only be a paragraph, and it is, they're very precise sort of protocols around it, how it needs to be drafted. And that then goes to the director, and the director takes what they think interesting, that goes to the VP, and then it would come to me. Right. It really teaches you to that skill, because you need to be able to summarize it in a few lines. And actually that report goes all the way up to the CEO. Right. I mean, every time people take things that, not the whole thing, and that is really a good tool. But some people hate it because it's that time of the week, I need to send in my weekly report. But it's such a useful tool, because it also forces you to reflect on what you've done. Yeah. It forces you to understand the issues that you've worked on. So, you've worked on an important contract. Well, you can't say, I've worked on an important contract. You need to explain, justify almost. The text needs to needs to be self-explanatory in terms of why it's an important contract. So it makes you reflect as well on, okay, why is this deal important to the company? So I've always found that a very useful tool, and it has taught me a lot, because initially when you start doing that, you get a lot of feedback. No, that's not clear.
Yeah.
Rewrite that, and it can be very annoying, but it's a very, very useful, very useful tool.
Well, it must help, or does it help with? So you're saying that goes outside of legal as well and travels?
Yes.
Travels
So it goes all the way up to the CEO. Actually, it goes to the chairman of the company, to every step of the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which must be good for legal's presence within the organization and how the value add and communicating what the purpose of that department is. And
which is actually the other part of communication I wanted to highlight, the importance of telling people what you do. And it's great. Don't never assume that people know what you're doing. It's not because you do a lot of good things and you work really hard that people actually notice or know. And I've had this when I first started going to like senior management meetings, and I would sit there, and then my then peers would come in and explain what they were doing. The head of HR would come in and explain, we're doing this, and all fancy names, big presentations. And I was sitting there initially thinking, wow, and a little bit of imposter syndrome. I'm not doing any of it. They're doing such great things. But then when you start thinking about it, I realized that I was actually doing great things as well. A lot of the same things. Yeah. And so, but I didn't communicate about them. So, it's important that you tell the other ExCom members, that you tell peers and other functions what you're actually doing, the things that you're working on. Now, very important, there needs to be substance, of course, because what I've also seen is people who are very good at telling what they're going to do. Yeah. But then if you pull up their presentations from 3 months ago, not a lot has happened. Yeah. So there needs to be substance to what you're doing, of course, but you need to communicate and tell people what you do, and sort of you need to have that in your head ready, like a memory card, because you never know who you're going to run into in an elevator or whatever. And if somebody asks you, a senior person, what's going on in legal, that you don't stand there like, I don't know. Well, we worked on this contract yesterday. No, you need to have it ready, available. Well, we're doing this and that. We're moving these people there. We're reorganizing. We're investing in ACLM systems, so that you have it ready all the time. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's very important.
And do you think as a function like legal, I think one bugbear I think of some lawyers is that we're not seen or not valued within our organization. How much of that do you think can be helped by communicating that message upwards?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. That's part of it. And there are always two sides to that, right? There is, of course, if it could be that you're in an organization that doesn't value legal, and maybe then you're not in the right organization. But it could also be that people don't really know what you're doing, or maybe you're restricting your own role too much. And so I think you need to look at that from both perspectives, and maybe there's a lot that you can do as well maybe it's perception, and maybe there is more that you can do to add value. And some companies see legal as a group of people sitting in the corner drafting contracts. In other companies, legal is recognized as being more strategic and helping drive the business forward. And in a lot of cases, maybe it can be your responsibility as well maybe you're not doing enough to drive the business forward. If people see you that way, maybe you should be opening your mouth in meetings and not only speak when you get asked a question about a contract, but just when there's general business discussion. Just insert yourself in the discussion.
Yeah, and I think that helps move the dial if you are in the former category where you said there might be an organization that doesn't value legal. Like there's little steps you can take daily, it sounds like, to ensure that you're at least trying to move the dial, invest in controlling what you can control.
And there's so much opportunity, more than ever there's opportunity, because if you see what's going on geopolitically, tariffs, there's so many things, legal,
Yeah.
quote unquote, things that impact the business, that if you don't see an opportunity to insert yourself in business discussions, then maybe you don't really understand what's going on. There is so much going on, more than ever, that impacts business decisions, that as a lawyer, there's always something useful that you can contribute.
Yeah, no, it's a time where I think there's, like you said, there's opportunities across the board, and the risks and the geopolitics and the pace of change, and where organisations have to adapt is critical for lawyers to play a role in that. In joining and being there. Sorry, the point I had on, like you said, you put your hand up, or you were talking about sustainability and identified that as an area of importance, and then it was, well, this can fall under legal. Are there other areas that are the point I wanted to get across is like those areas that are quite quasi-legal or could fall within legal, like putting your hand up and taking ownership of it. Was there other times in your career? I'll rephrase this question. So you spoke about the sustainability piece and having that added to your responsibilities, and after having discussed it and brought it to the attention of people within FedEx, were there other times where you'd gone through similar experiences of areas that were legal or could be classed as legal?
Yeah, I mean, so in my responsibility, I also had government affairs or public affairs, as more commonly known in Europe, and so that broadens really sort of the perspective of the things that you're involved in, and so that has often been something, and it's also been a personal interest of mine. So I was always very happy to sort of being able to be engaged in that, because that opens it up to really the big sort of geopolitical issues. And then if you've been with the company for a long time and you know the industry and the company very well, then automatically sort of the line between what's legal and what's business becomes very vague. For example, I hate the term business partners. Yeah. And I use it sometimes as well because it's easy to explain. It's us and the rest of the company. But legal is a business partner, and otherwise we're not doing something right. So but once you become more senior and you understand the business better and the industry, then automatically you get dragged into all sorts of discussions. When it becomes very interesting is when you do M&A. We bought quite a few companies during my time at FedEx, small and big ones. And then you get into all aspects of the business. And M&A lawyers will tell you this because they see everything, right? Everything. And because you're usually the first ones to go in as well. And
diligence.
With the due diligence, and you learn about the business and you know what to look out for. And then you have a lot of business discussions about, what do you think about their business model? Because I mean, the angle would initially be, is there a legal risk? But then it becomes very quickly, is there a reputational risk? Is there other risks? Does it make sense? Is it sustainable, etc.? So
yeah. And taking on those extra responsibilities, like, is there a difference, do you feel, how it's perceived if you're identifying and taking ownership rather than being, okay, like, this sits with you now? Like, do you feel within an organization that can be...
Well, I've always, I've volunteered for quite a few things or grabbed things, and I've never had a situation, I can't remember of one situation where somebody told me, well, that's not your area. You shouldn't be doing this. Usually, people are very happy because they're all very busy, and you need to be careful sometimes a little bit how you step into other people's territory. But generally, if you're in a big organization and you take on things that are not technically in your job description, people are quite happy about that because it just takes things away from other people.
Yeah. I think it can definitely elevate the role as well, and being visible. I think it gets back to that. And
But it
communicating the message.
needs to be in your sort of in your character as well. I've always been bored very quickly, and so I've always had a natural tendency of grabbing new things and adding on things. I know other people may not have that tendency, or very content in their little space.
Yeah.
So it needs to be, part of who you are as well. You can't really sort of force that, I think.
Yeah. Cool. And 22 years, did you ever envisage that period of time or period of service when you
No,
you
it's
started
really,
that
it's
role?
like you wake up one morning and you think, gosh. At one point, we were sitting in the A&E management meeting, and the president of the region looked at me and said, "You are my most senior person." And I still saw myself as the newbie in the team, but that was like 10 years before, or 15 years before that.
Yeah.
So, and then you wake up, how can I have become the most senior person on the team?
Yeah.
So it just goes. But the company I worked for went through so much change, and we did acquisitions, and it was completely different. So it wasn't like a steady ride.
New territories and expansion of the role. Yeah, I think that's the thing that appeals about larger international organizations, that opportunity to diversify and move into different areas is a huge appeal for career progression. Nice. We'll jump into lesson 2.
Yeah. So lesson 2 is, I think it's important to underline how important it is to create win-win situations.
Right.
And then the other side is that sort of to put yourself in the shoes of the other person or the other organization that you're dealing with. And it comes back at different levels. In business dealings, lawyers are often trained or conditioned not only to make sure their side wins or our side wins, but also to make sure the other side loses. And that doesn't work in business dealings. And it's something that I had to pick up along the way, because when I started out, and I did a lot of contracts, I thought I did a good job if I could slide things into contracts, without the other party noticing. But that's not productive, because your job is not to produce a contract that you can win a court case with, because when you get to court, then it's too late already.
Yeah.
You're already in trouble. But it's to build a contract that can be a good foundation for a long-lasting win-win business relationship with whoever you're dealing with, be it a customer or a vendor or whatever. And so that's something I think is very important, and a lot of lawyers need to pick that up. I've always, for example, when we did standard form agreements, standard agreements, I've always pushed the team to put together fair and balanced agreements, not one-sided agreements, because they don't work. You just get more time spent, and even if you get people to sign them because you're a big organization and you just force it on people, it comes back and it doesn't result in long-standing business relations. And the light bulb moment for me was, I remember sitting in a meeting once we were on a conference call in a big conference room around a star phone. It's not too long ago. It sounds like ages ago now. Doing conference calls with codes and
those big things
and star phones in the middle of the room. And we had an issue in our franchisee network. And I made a comment like, "Oh, but we have this provision in the contract, and maybe we can use it." But I think I said it in a way like we can sort of, abuse it, right? And then the COO, a very smart and very experienced guy, said, "Well, hold on a second. The franchisees that we're dealing with, they're not criminals. These are people who have worked really hard and have been an important part of our business for many, many years. So we're not here to do that. We're here to find a solution to the problem." And that for me was really sort of like a light bulb moment. Like, you're right. Yeah. That's completely the wrong approach to this issue. So build win-win relationships and things. I've sat in contract negotiations where people think the deal was done and we just needed to paper it. Where I had to say, "Look, we can probably get them to sign this, but the contract that there are a lot of issues, or there are issues that need to be resolved here. And maybe they don't even know about it, but there is an issue with the contract does not reflect the intent of what they're trying to do.
Right.
And then you say, well, why are you worried about that? Well, I am worried about it because I want this deal to be successsul.
Yeah.
I don't want this contract to be
Hold
signed.
on, yeah.
That's not success. The success is the deal needs to be successful. And so, for me, that's I think that's an important lesson to learn if you want to be a successful lawyer in a business.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between, yes, working in a law firm and working for a business, and aligning those business objectives are slightly different, right? So, and yeah, good advice from the CEO, and very good to know that companies. I mean, do you think that does it still? Or do you see it having changed? Like, it feels like big businesses in terms of long-term supplier relationships are becoming maybe less critical, and then things being short-term and quick turnaround on things driving.
Well, I don't know if it has changed in business, but I do think it has changed in the perspective of the legal departments. I think legal departments are much more, in sophisticated organizations, are much more business oriented than they used to be. Especially certainly if I compare it to when I started. I mean, some of the things I was taught by the senior lawyers I worked for, I wouldn't tell anybody to do.
Yeah.
It was really about very sort of we were maybe the image of the nasty lawyer, right?
Yeah.
That's your job.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't, and I think you see less and less of that in sophisticated organizations. And also, if you deal with other companies or other businesses who have that kind of mentality, you just feel it when you interact with their legal teams that they're also there to come, to find a good deal that works for the business.
Yeah, nice. So how did you get into law in the first place? How did that come around?
Yeah, that's interesting. So when I was 18, and in Belgium you go to law school immediately after you finish your high school.
Okay.
So you go to university and it's 5 years. And we had a career orientation discussion with my teacher, and he asked me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I think I want to go into law."
Right.
And it had nothing to do with business law. I didn't even know there were business lawyers. I just found it interesting, and
So what did you have in your mind? Courtroom?
No,
what type of law?
there was. I think I wanted to travel, and maybe I thought becoming a diplomat or something.
Okay.
But I come from a background where there were no lawyers. So
Right.
To be honest with you, I never met a lawyer.
Okay.
Never had to do with a lawyer. And maybe where I come from, that was a good thing.
Right.
But so I just, and maybe a lot of people still don't know, but in-house lawyers do. So I didn't know what lawyers did, let alone company lawyers or business lawyers.
Yeah.
So it was more about I was just interested in the law and all of those things. But actually, the teacher told me that was probably a bit overreached for me, and I should maybe adjust my expectations, which I didn't do. That was a stubbornness, which was good. So then I started studying law, and during my study, I tended towards criminal law, actually, because I just, again, out of pure interest, I thought it was fascinating. But at the same time, I was a musician, and actually I thought I would make a career doing that, but that didn't work out. But how I got into sort of working for a company is that there was a record company called EMI Music.
Yeah.
When I finished my studies, who was looking for a lawyer.
Okay.
Actually, it was my dad who saw the job posting in the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, maybe this is something for you.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, that's great. I can go work in the music industry.
Join the
and
two,
then
yeah.
I joined EMI Music, and the entertainment part was interesting at first because we were still the lawyers. We weren't doing all the fancy stuff, but still, you get to go to concerts, go backstage, but that part. It quickly became less interesting, and I realized that being a business lawyer in a company was actually the more interesting part.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's how I became a company lawyer, almost by accident. It just, it was a very unusual path. But so once I was in that, and then I started doing an MBA because I thought I need to get more of the business sense.
Right.
And then the music industry was in really bad shape because it was a time of illegal downloading, and the music industry hadn't come up with an alternative yet. There was Napster and things like that. Yeah. So it was really going very badly. And everybody kept telling me how good I was at what I did, but there were no opportunities. It was only downsizing. Mm-hmm. And then, FedEx came, a recruiter called me, and I joined FedEx, and so that's how I got into what I'm doing now. So sometimes people don't know what they want, and sort of it's the circumstances that show people what they're actually interested in. Yeah. They don't even know themselves.
Yeah, it's quite funny because you pretty much probably got your dream, if you were to describe your dream job or dream legal job, would have been potentially within music and entertainment, given your personal interests, and so many people strive for that. But yeah, you've landed in it and thought, right, actually the what the business does is maybe secondary to the interest, the legal department, and how it sits within the business.
It's sometimes people, you don't know what you want, and it needs to sort of develop itself.
Yeah. What type of musician were you?
Oh, we don't want to talk about that. No, we don't want to talk about it. Not a good one.
Okay. Not
a good one.
I'll ask you after. In terms of genre. Cool. And that sort of that move into legal at that point in time, joining an organization like the US business, was there a marked change in terms of how going into that larger business was at that point in time?
EMI was a big company, was relatively small compared to a company of the size of FedEx, and so it was a very different environment, much bigger, much more sort of sophisticated, professional. And so there was a lot that I learned, but also complex, because in EMI it was a relatively small business unit. You know who the boss was. And then in FedEx, it was a functional organization. And so it becomes very opaque at some points. Who do you report to? How does this all sort of work together? So I learned quite a bit very quickly there. Yeah.
Cool. All right, we'll move on to lesson 3. Yes.
So lesson number 3, challenge everything. Always, the environment in which you operate, always ask, why are we doing this? Why is this being done this way? And again, it's something that I've always had, and I call it healthy laziness. Right. I remember when I was a kid, it was, 13. And during the summer, my dad asked me to mow the lawn every other week, and I hated it. Right. At least 2-3 hours on Saturday afternoon. I'd much rather hang out with my friends. Yeah. So during those 2-3 hours, the only thing I was focused on is how can I get this done quicker with less effort. Right. If I go sideways, if I do this, if I do that. And so that's sort of that mentality of trying to do things with less effort and quicker has always stuck with me, because I get bored quite quickly doing repetitive work. And I remember, coming to a new job, and I'd never heard of contract management system. Okay. But when I came there, the contracts were moved around from one desk to another in like folders, printed out. So you got the folder, you open it, and then you saw the finance approval, and then you got the contract, you needed to redline it, whatever, and then move it to the next person for review or approval. And almost instantly I said, well, this cannot be how this needs to be done. So I started talking to some people in IT and in finance, and together we developed a contract management system based on PeopleSoft, without even knowing what contract management was.
Right.
And it was just out of sort of a desire to do this more efficient, because I was reviewing like 1,000 contracts a year, literally.
Right.
So just to do it more efficiently, to do it quicker with less effort. So the lesson there is never assume that things are done in the right way or in the most efficient way because it's always been done like that, or because you're in a sophisticated environment. You could be in the most sophisticated company, environment, whatever, with the smartest people, and there is always opportunity to do things better.
Yeah.
Now, you need to be careful, of course, how you question things. Well, first of all, you need to. There's sometimes things that you don't know. You know, reasons that you don't necessarily know. I always tell my teenagers at home this: before you have an opinion, you actually need to know something. So maybe you shouldn't have an opinion on this.
Current generation,
anyway, so
social media and stuff.
But then once you're certain that you've sort of got the aspects, and you can bring it up, but you need to be emotional intelligence is very important. Make sure you don't offend people. The opportunity needs the timing needs to be right. The way you address it needs to be right, because and then people are resistant to change as well, and you need to recognize that as well and understand why they are resisting to change, and maybe they have so that's critically important, the emotional intelligence part of that.
It's in terms of like your team, how did you with these lessons, or with that lesson in particular, team of 200 in the legal, or 200 lawyers and a wider team, is it something you try and get them to instill in their day-to-day, and how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, if you manage a department at that level, that's sort of what you spend a lot of your time on. I mean, you don't actually spend a lot of time on the pure legal stuff, because you've got a lot of people who know a lot more about these things. Somebody asked me once, how do you know the laws of these 200 plus countries that you oversee? Well, I don't. That's not my job. But the team management, the coaching, and I always found sort of the more interesting part of the being able to transfer the things that you've learned over the years, and learn the hard way, often, running into brick walls and hurting yourself really badly. But, transferring that and coaching, and it's always been sort of the favorite part of the job for me.
What was the least favorite part of the job, like the top legal role? What was it? What was the hardest part?
The hardest part. So that sometimes the politics, but you get your way around those as well. And but I mean, I guess people in large groups tend to have those issues.
Yeah. And is that, like, in terms of anyone aspiring for that level of general counsel role, are there any blind spots that you had before taking on that position, or anything you wish you had known that you didn't know?
Well, one of the things that I maybe would do differently now, looking back, is that, and actually I had written this down as well as sort of part of this lesson to change everything, is don't wait for people to come to you and tell you that there's something wrong with how your department is functioning.
Right.
You need to be very proactive. Even if you don't get any complaints and people you think that everybody's content with what you're doing, you need to be much more proactive. Don't wait, for example, in terms of how you spend the resources. Don't wait for a consultant or a CEO or the finance department to come in and look at your numbers and say, what is this? What is that? You need to be very proactive and look for opportunities yourself. Yeah. And I think being more proactive on that is something I think, that's because at some point somebody will come and ask you. Somebody will come and say, okay, look, hold on a second here. We're spending X millions every year on your little group there. What do you spend it on, and how do you spend it? And maybe when they come ask you, it's already too late. You should be more proactive. For that, it's very important, I think, to know your numbers. And it's, again, like I spoke earlier about the memory card, about what your team is doing.
Yeah.
You need to have a little memory card on your numbers as well. If you sit in a meeting and somebody says, what are we spending on legal department?
Right.
You need to know, well, we're spending X million per year.
Yeah.
It's X% of revenue. The industry benchmark is whatever, 0.4%.
Yeah.
So we're a little under that. Or we're above that, but we're doing X and Y and Z to get in line. You need to have those things in your head. And we're spending, 50% of our budget goes to salaries and wages. The other 50% is professional fees. We're spending this much on litigation from that X on, and not in a lot of detail, but it's, people are always very impressed if you have that knowledge, top of mind immediately.
Yeah.
Again, you're sitting in a meeting, the CFO says, well, the legal expenses have gone up. Well, they've gone up by 5%. And then I can say they've gone up by 5%, but that's because we had this, big lawsuit in that country.
Yeah.
End of discussion. But if you sit there waffling, and I don't know, did it really? Then you're not making a good impression.
Yeah, it's like back to your sort of on the preparation on the preparation front, and the three key things going into a meeting. Where did you get that information from? Like, who did you, is it internally? And you spoke about external benchmarks. Like, was there anything that you feel was particularly
one of the first
useful?
things I did when I became General Counsel for International at FedEx, I worked with a company with Trevor Ford, Smarter Law. And asked him to come in and do a full review of what we're spending, where we're spending it on, what we're spending it on, and then also benchmark it against industry standard. And he works with data from the ACC, Association of Corporate Counsel, so it's the most extensive database of information on legal spending that's available. And so that was a really good investment, because he came to me and he said, you're spending it on this and that. This is the industry benchmark. Because then a few years later, we had a consultant come in that was hired by another department. And they came with different numbers.
Okay.
But my numbers were much more sophisticated and thought through. And so that discussion was I was very ready for that discussion. And again, it was not about being defensive. It was just about, I wanted to make sure, I just wanted to know whether I was doing well or not compared to other companies, et cetera. So I think that's worth, the investment, to have somebody come in with the right, and give you some external data elements so that you know how much you're spending, how much other companies in your industry or more generally are spending, and whether you're doing well or not.
Yeah. No, I think it's something that's probably overlooked by many, and can only help the individuals in their careers internally and their worth to that business, and helping in those conversations and for budgets and what have you. So I think it's really sound insights, and paying a bit of money up front to get the insights. Great, and I'm asking guests their recommendations for other podcasts or literature that you've found particularly useful.
Yeah,
or that you're a listener of. Doesn't have to be career focused.
Yeah, no, maybe on books, but I tend to focus on a topic and then read everything about it, and then a few months later I move to something else. So maybe I'm just going to give you the 3 books that I've read recently. And you'll see they're all very, very sort of in the same zone. One is called Emotional Intelligence Habits.
Okay.
It's written by a psychologist, I think Dr. Bradbury, if I'm not mistaken. And, it's like an encyclopedia of emotional intelligence issues, and because emotional intelligence is so critically important. It's a very interesting book, and you can actually, I think he says it at the beginning of his book, you don't need to write it from the beginning to end, read it from the beginning to end. It's like different chapters and different pieces, all sorts of things on emotional intelligence. Another one I thought was very interesting is the author is Joe Navarro, and he was he's a retired FBI agent who was the specialist of body language. And so he wrote a book, I think Everybody Talks, everybody within 2 words, and everybody talks, how body language reveals a lot about what people, how people are feeling. And it's extremely interesting. Not only to be able to read other people, but also how your own behavior reflects on other people. And in a business environment, as a manager or something, it's or how you sit in a meeting, how you behave in a meeting, etc. It can be really interesting. He has this thing about how feet never lie, right? And if you if you're talking to somebody, I'm not going to look at your feet now.
You've just been incredibly self-conscious.
If you're talking to somebody, if the feet are pointed towards you, then there's a connection. If the feet are pointed away from you, then the person is getting ready to flee. And he's got a lot of experience, and he writes out that those you cannot fake that. But so very interesting. Interesting book. And then maybe the third one, that's the last one I read. It's actually in French, so maybe for the people who read in French. It's a book written by Laurent Maury, and he was the chief negotiator for the RAID, which is one of the French elite police forces who do hostage situations. And then he went on, and he actually, I think he's the head of security for a big French company now. And he sort of describes what he learned as a hostage negotiator, which is very extreme, high stakes environment, how sort of those things he learned, how you can use those in a business environment. And again, a lot of emotional intelligence, how to read other people and predict their sort of reactions and how to get them to do what you want to be done, etc. So very, I may be on to old timers or paragliders next month, but
human behavior as well.
Human behavior.
I feel I've been giving away some tells and being read in this interview. Hopefully, I don't. My body language hasn't been of someone outside their comfort zone or outside their outside their.
You see, touching your face.
Yeah, no,
he has a whole chapter on people touching their face. What that means, and it doesn't mean that you're lying, by the way.
It means that I'm uncomfortable in talking about my body language. Nice. Well, thank you for sharing those. I'll check them out and share the links to anyone that's interested. But really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to following your next challenge and hearing more about that as well.
Well, thank you, Scott, for the time.
Yeah, thank you. So that wraps up another episode of Lessons I Learned in Law, powered by Harriet Brown in-house legal recruitment. Now, I share these stories each week to help lawyers of all levels, and both in private practice or working in-house. And it doesn't matter if you're early in your career or you're already leading a team. Learning from your peers or from those who have walked in your shoes before, then this is the show for you. If you find it useful, I would love it if you could share it with your colleagues or share it with your network, or drop us a message just to let us know that you're listening and that you're out there. Feedback really helps us grow the show and take it in the direction that gives the most value to you, our listeners. So until next time, I've been Scott Brown. Thank you.